Where do you see the AEC industry right now with all the different types?
When it's a busy construction site, that guy's calling you. He's like, hey, how much longer? We ready for this? We ready for this? It's moving.
I found the technology initially very interesting. And myself and my business partner, Vinny, we really believe that cameras could be a fantastic communication.
If you can at real time open and see what is really there right now, that's as real reality as it gets.
If there is data captured about you, you own that data.
Welcome to the BIM Heroes Podcast presented by Evercam. Today's topic is going to be talking about the state of the AEC industry. This is our second episode of the industry. Welcome, guys. We have Marco and Matthew Byrd. Wanted to start out with just some quick introductions about where both of you are and why I've invited you both to talk about reality capture. We'll start with Marco.
Thank you, Cody. Yeah, great to be here. So, yes, Marco Herbst, I'm CEO of Evercam, and our journey into the world of reality capture, you could say, began in around about 2010, when I was filming the conversion of an architect's studio into a piano factory back in my Berlin life. Since then, we have become now a full suite reality capture platform. So we're trying to deal with all the main camera lines. That is fixed position, where we sort of made our name, drone, and now 360. And yeah, like I say, just very interested to be here, part of this fast expanding reality capture domain.
That's great. Great to be with both of you today. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Matthew Byrd, and I guess, my history and journey getting into reality capture and maybe why we're part of this conversation. I actually started out in the land surveying industry, grew up in a family with a dad as a land surveyor, so I kind of fell into the industry. Actually, I guess that's the story of how a lot of surveyors get started, even is, being younger, kind of having a summer job, maybe on a field crew, and then you end up having a career out of it. But it was actually similar time frame to Marco talking here, about 2010 and 2009, somewhere in that range. We first learned about laser scanning, and at the time I was younger, in a survey industry, in a survey firm, and the company I was at was like, well, why don't you be the guy to look into this technology and trial it and figure out how we're going to use it. And that was the moment that really changed the trajectory of my career. From that point toward today has been fully focused on, again, starting out with laser scanning, but then developing into seeing this world of not just a laser scanner, but what that data is, and then all of these other sensors to capture more data, and realizing there's a lot of problems we can solve with creativity and new technologies. So, the journey of doing services and a variety of projects across industries, and now a big focus on trying to raise awareness to that, because over the years, I think the biggest thing I've noticed is there's so many tools, there's so many capabilities, there's amazing technologies, but there's not a lot of people that talk about it, and there's a lack of awareness, a lack of education. So even being on a podcast here, I appreciate you guys doing this. It's a way to share, and I love that. So yeah, thanks again for pulling this together.
Thank you. Want to talk about the state of reality capture, specifically in the AEC industry. You concentrate on the whole industry as a broad, so all the different types. Where do you see the AEC industry right now with all the different types? And coming from that background in land surveying, you really understand that piece. Just want to start there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're at the point that it's not becoming rare to see laser scanning or drones on a job site. It's becoming more common over the last several years. Certain equipment has come down in price. It's becoming faster. different design softwares, AutoCAD Suite and Bentley, and they have started integrating and adopting data that comes from whatever reality capture device we're talking about. And so I feel like we're at the point now, it's very common to see some portion of reality capture applied on a project, yet I still think we're only seeing 10 or 20% of the use of what it could be being used for. I also still feel, even though it's very common to see some level of reality capture on a project, if I had to throw out a percentage off the top of my head based on the amount of people I talk to, I think maybe 30% of firms that should be using reality capture touch it at all. If you pick up the phone and call 10 architects or 10 engineers or 10 survey companies, I think you'd find that 50% or less are actually utilizing these technologies today.
And you believe that is because of the lack of knowledge that they have about what they can do, or they just don't understand which one to use for what they're trying to solve?
I think it's all of it. I think it is, there are some companies that maybe 10 years ago tried a technology and it was difficult, it was slow, it was expensive. So they have in their mind, man, we're not going to get into that new technology stuff. It's not worthwhile. It's too expensive. And so there's some companies that have maybe that thought in their mind of we've seen it before, it didn't really work out well. There are some companies that I've talked to that haven't even asked to try it because their assumption is that it's going to be too expensive. So there isn't an understanding of what does the real workflow look like and how much does it cost and what is it saving. And then I do think it's also, yes, a lack of education on what tools are available, which one is a good fit for this type of work. And then there are companies that just don't really know anything about it. And it can be overwhelming when you look at new technologies and this data, when you have a company and a team that's used to, let's say, as an architect, they're used to drafting in 2D. Well, this idea of digital lasers and points and 3D and transition and, your whole team is uncomfortable. Like sometimes it just seems so overwhelming that they just don't even want to get started. So those are definitely some of the reasons I believe it's still slow to adopt, which is why, I try to put a big focus on we need to start, those of us that use it or that have used it or that have a case study or that have trialed different devices, we have to start sharing that type of information in order for the industry to grow, because we have to help those people that maybe have those hesitations or questions get them answered.
And that's one of the things that I thought was interesting. I was talking to Marco before the conversation here about going to ENR and listening to the conversations they were having out on the West Coast. The industry other than agriculture, the AEC industry, building industry, is the second oldest industry in the world behind agriculture. But agriculture, the technology that you're seeing in that is just exploded in that front, and they're all in. For some reason, our industry that's right behind them has not taken that leap. And I want to have a dialogue between you and Marco on this, because that's what's so frustrating about it, is that how can we drive that forward? And then Marco, in terms of where you're at with your company, how did you decide to go into construction cameras? You thought that was a good way to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, very much. That often raises its head, that this construction has this reputation for having been slow to innovate, and it puzzled me for a long time, because never have I met such a density of skilled engineers who like to build and create than in this industry, and yet it is statistically true, what you say, and I think the commercial pressures have always been that the cost of mistakes is very high, and innovation is about embracing the ability to make mistakes, or the ability to make mistakes with controlled losses. It's not a nice environment for that when you've got an 18-month deadline to deliver a project, and the incentives are to stick to what works. What I think other industries did really, really well is they closed the feedback loop. So they reduced the amount of time from something happening and the adjustment of the consequences. Most famously, that was Japanese car manufacturing, right? That was this continuous improvement, closing the feedback loop. And so that mistakes were detected as they happened, right? That's kind of lean manufacturing idea. In software, it's about agile software development and the sprints mentality. And what I believe is happening now, led by reality capture, led by these new technologies, as Matt is saying, are suddenly affordable and available, is we're closing the feedback loop. We're bringing what's actually happening on site onto the desk of the person who can do something about that. So methods that have been proven successes in other industries are for the first time meaningfully available in construction. And some of that, well, I would say the largest part of that is actually those external factors of just these new tools like LiDAR, laser, drones, 360, high resolution cameras that we use, just becoming affordable and usable in a meaningful way.
Yeah, well, I definitely second that. I think the one thing I want to go back to is your point on they do put such pressure on time frames. And I mean, most constructions I've been on, it is rolling. People want to move. You're working with a superintendent, and it's very different from going and scanning some other where it's like, when can you get us the data? Okay, we'll get it to you in 2 weeks. No, when it's a busy construction site, that guy's calling you. He's like, hey, how much longer? Were you ready for this? We're ready for this. It's moving. And when you look at new technologies, like you said, Marco, innovation is about failure. It is about trying something new, pushing it to the point that it does fail, so you know how to use it, you know where it improves. And so I think one thing that I do see some companies successfully doing and how they're maybe overcoming that is that we don't want to try new technologies on a real job where the failure is going to cause a big problem. We want to create test environments or teams within a construction company that their job is to go try that, not to replace immediately the old process where you don't really have the details figured out yet, but trial it. The term pilot project is just everywhere. Everybody wants to do a pilot and prove out, does it work? What did it save? What were the struggles? And then you have the way of like, okay, we did the test, we have the results. Now we can compare and say, is it worthwhile to actually integrate into the company now and actually put into the next project? But I definitely agree. See that pressure part and the timeline part, one of those hesitations as well. It's hard to change when you're under pressure. Like you said, you're already doing a process works, so you don't really want to take the risk of trying something new.
Yeah, and in that conversation, the thing that comes up a lot is which part of the process do I use the different technologies? And going back to this conversation, Marco, is why did you choose to go into the construction camera side of reality capture versus any of the other parts of the industry?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you a wise story there. We tried a lot of things that didn't work, would be the true answer. The common factor is I found the technology initially very interesting, and myself and my business partner, Vinny, we really believe that cameras could be a fantastic communication tool if they were used slightly differently. They're even called security cameras, right? They're typically, it's recording down into the basement, someone's looking at 50 cameras and they're there to catch the bad guy. And you only go down into that basement if you've got a problem. We believed that images are a really, really powerful tool for sharing information, and sharing and collaboration is the path to success. If ever there was a way of explaining what the internet has done for business and for society, it's this sort of opening up of information. So that's at a big scale the agenda we were into. How can we use cameras as a communication tool? And our history was then enabling other software developers to work with cameras. We built like a software development platform for cameras. And we were looking at the manufacturing industry. We were looking at sort of transparency, traceability, logistics. And it was literally by accident that we had a construction client. And ironically, the camera went offline, and they called us, or our American client called us furious why the camera was offline. And it was this lovely moment of knowing somebody cares. Finally, we have a client who was really obviously getting value from their camera. And we doubled down on that. It took us about 4 weeks to turn the company around 180 degrees and focus all our energy on the construction industry. And we really haven't looked back. There are big, expensive problems. And if they can be mitigated or avoided, the payback is large. So much more so than the camera as a capture after the horse has left the stable, so to speak. Yes, so that timeline that would have been around 2016, but it was instant. As soon as we saw the power of full video recording and live video, high resolution coming off a construction site, we knew we'd found the industry that we wanted to make our home.
And with that, bringing Matt into that conversation, the analytics side of what you're doing versus some of the still framed, photography. Just want to have a conversation about that. That, Matt, one of the things I found really interesting about what Evercam was doing was they were really starting to lead on the analytics of how to take that data from a traditional construction camera that's been around, for years, that's just taking, time-lapse pictures and documentation, but taking it to that next level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the next level we're at with a lot of these technologies, even on the capture side and the still photo side and the point cloud side. Is so many technologies are out there. They're awesome. They're fast. They capture all this data. Now the biggest conversation in the industry is, what do you do with the data? What else can be done with the data? How do we extract more value out of the data? How do we make it useful to more parties in a company or a project, as opposed to just doing it for this one little use case of, I need to measure a wall, And so I definitely tell people my thought on the next phase of this industry and technology is those that are getting creative with that part, with the analytics and the information and the automation and now, we see things out in the industry or in the world or society like the AI getting all this attention, and now how do we pull that in and utilize other technologies that are starting to become available into our processes, and machine learning and, automatically tracking. So, I think that's definitely a great focus.
And then Marco, on your front, what are you really pushing for Evercam to try to, really get into that? Because there's so many different things that we've seen from over the last few years of where analytics wants to go. Supply chain management, where you see something leave somewhere and come to a job site versus, some stockpile analysis as dirt is moved across the site. Just trying to see where, your big focus is and where it's going.
Yeah. So if scrolling back to 2016, the peak of technology back then was motion detection, which didn't work very well. As often as not, it was a tree blowing in the wind that was setting off an alarm. And now, on a weekly basis, what machine learning, what AI is able to do is just mind blowing. So our challenge is to taking the paper that is coming out of Meta's research department on a Monday and trying to get that in a useful way into the product, but by the end of the week. So where we are today, the big advantage, I suppose, was this high resolution full video capture, and that opened the doors to a lot of things. Sometimes what you're trying to prove is that something didn't happen, so it really makes sense to have the whole timeline. Our first success was, you mentioned logistics, was just exactly that. Just watching everything that comes into and away from the site. That is an awful lot of information. One of the big difficult points, you could say, between project owner and contractor is simply the question of, are we where we should be? Progress checking, are we on track? Right? And the traditionally that's a periodically generated report, which is passed back down the line. But if you're the person who knows how much soil has left that site and how much concrete and steel has arrived, you're probably the best informed person on whether or not that project is on track. And that is true for the 10 billion plus projects, as it is for the stuff at the lower end of the scale. So our gate report, where we're just simply doing that, tracking what materials are coming on site in real time, it's really, really powerful. That's part of the progress tracking topic, dispute resolution, dispute avoidance topic. It's really big. Safety is right up there. Safety and behavioral change. And again, just to, as you have me going down memory lane, the very first time I got the camera working on my computer, this is sitting back 2010, and I noticed how I was hunched over my desk because I could see it for the first time from the camera that was sitting behind me. And it got me to sit upright and improve my posture. And it's silly, trivial story, but that's exactly what's happening on the construction site. There doesn't need to be enforcement. There doesn't need to be AI. Just helping people to be more aware of what's actually happening already creates behavioral change, which is one of the hardest things to implement. So helping people to help themselves, but that really ties into safety, which is the big win. If anyone can impact accidents, injuries on site, I think that's the big target here for AI and analytics. But there's an awful lot of wins that are easy to pick up along the way. Just simply the right image sent to the right person. But it's very, very exciting to just see how smart the cameras are getting.
Yeah, and I think on the safety aspect of it, that's one of the things that has drove the industry crazy, because we have tried so hard to become more safe. We've only made marginal changes to it. We look at it every year, and something has to get better on the technology front to drive this.
What the cameras also really help with there is making it relevant and personal. Having an accident recorded on site, somebody you know, a face you recognize, or a near miss, using that in the Monday meeting, the toolbox talk, that is so much more impactful than pulling something out of stock archive or a couple of PowerPoint slides. We've had great success there, just taking something from a known site, known people, and turning that around fast.
You don't need your traditional safety video if you have something as serious as here's right outside the door that we just saw the other day. It just happened. Like, it could have happened that quickly, and they could have got really hurt.
Absolutely.
And then on the other side too, Marco and Matt, I want you to chime into this as well, is the new challenge in our industry is procurement, right? During the pandemic, it was trying to get different materials. Now it is a bunch of people retired and trying to get back to work to get that started up again. And how do we solve that procurement with some of this technology? Do we do it to help the supply chain move forward? Do we do it when we get to the job and see where different materials are at? There's a lot of waste that occurs in this industry. Just trying to see that big new topic of this procurement challenge we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think a lot of the technologies help with that problem. I mean, and in so many different areas, yes, when we have more accurate data on site or an existing building, and it's helping us improve design, which is now helping us fabricate material. Now we have less waste when we install on site. From even a survey company, which we do surveying, we look at these new technologies and say, if I can't find another surveyor to hire for field work, but I can buy another laser scanner that helps me do more efficient work, I can scale what I can accomplish with more tools than more people. And that's a huge problem in the industry. Every survey firm is trying to hire people. And then as the interest in all these technologies is growing, drone work and laser scanning work, Now a company might say, we want to start up a department. Well, good luck hiring someone to come run it. Like, there is not this huge, volume of people looking for jobs that know how to do this. If they know how to do it, they're already in a role because there's a company who knows they need it and they're doing it. You get to do one of two things. You have to either work hard and try to entice somebody to leave the job that they're at and come over and start building, or you have to do what a lot of companies did several years ago. You have to start from scratch. You have to do the research. You have to trial the gear. You have to train yourself, and there's this couple year time of like building up a department or building that skill set. So the technologies can absolutely help with that problem of labor shortage in different areas, efficiencies on projects. But even the lack of skill set around how to use the technologies is one of the reasons I have this focus toward needing to create educational content around all the technologies, because there's not an easy way today. If you get a brand new construction company or architect or anybody that says, okay, I want to get into this, where do I start? I don't know. Google yourself to death. Like,
who's not a job description?
No, there's not a job description. But even apart from that, what technology should you adopt? You have to spend all this time researching and Googling and find. There's nowhere good to find what camera companies exist, what scanner companies exist, what are the differences, and why would I pick one versus the other, and what's the workflow really look like from start to finish? It's so much of it is on the job, hands-on trialing. I now have this belief of like, we need to find all the companies that are successfully doing different parts of this. We need to have these conversations. We need to record it. We need to turn those into webinars. We need to build this library of content that when a new company has this idea, they can go find videos that at least gets them up to speed of where the industry is today. And then we need to actually create advanced training material that says, if you want to get into scanning, there's actually here's something that's available that gets you started. It trains you through the different devices and the different capabilities and the workflows required to capture. And I don't want to say anything bad about vendors and hardware and software providers. However, I will say that in the industry, I think there's also a certain amount of volume that certain, providers push on sales that sometimes they make it look so easy of just, hey, buy a scanner, press a button, it's super easy. And a lot of firms get started and they fail because they don't have proper education. They don't know proper workflows. And there's so many devices, so many workflows, so many use cases, different levels of accuracy and things you might need for different types of projects. I just fully believe that one of our biggest struggles in the industry is the lack of education. And I think that's something we all need to work on as a community to better our own business, better our own knowledge, and better the industry as a whole, as it's definitely on this growing ramp.
And Marco, what is Evercam trying to do on that front to help, on the education side of how to use the camera for more than just here, grab the pictures and create a time?
Yeah. So the label that I'd put it here is about democratizing the technology. I think it's exactly what Matt's talking about. Making this stuff less and less specialist, more and more available. In our world, where it's very, very visual, again, we're talking cameras, drones, and 360. What we're always striving for is, if you can play Minesweeper, you'll find your way around Evercam, right? So that it's very, very accessible. We'd have projects here where we have 40, 50 daily active users logging into the system and solving their own problems using Evercam. So that's the safety people, that's the on-site management, off-site management, it's logistics, it's across the spectrum, but they've each found their way of using it, and that it's as intuitive as playing a computer game. I concede to Mike, it's not always that simple, and we've got a long way to travel as an industry to really make it easy. And yes, education and being realistic about things is part of that. But when you get your hands on some of those today's computer games, you see very much where it's coming. Like Google Earth is a very, very intuitive experience and just gets better every couple of months. And that's that industry actually is also where we would be recruiting from. So most of our software engineers are all coming from the gaming industry. You see now how a lot of the gaming technology companies are coming into AEC. These two worlds are very much merging and learning from each other from a technology perspective. So yes, democratizing the technology, and that's absolutely our job. This should be super intuitive. I think we're making a lot of progress there, with still room to improve.
Yeah, and just on that front, and kind of almost switching gears, but more so on something that me and Marco have talked about a lot, Matt, which is something we can't control versus something like knowledge of trying to teach people how to use the technology, is a lot around the lines of delays that occur in our industry. And one of the ones I focus a lot on with Marco is weather. I think a lot of us on construction projects are becoming weathermen because one things that we look at that we can't control. And one of the things that I've worked with Marco a lot with construction cameras is how can we take the data from like a sensor and bring that into something where we can help jobs document weather delays. Just wanted to have that quick dialogue on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. I mean, and I just like that comment, or the focus in general in all areas of everything, is what do you have control over and what do you not have control over. I do see a lot of people kind of get caught up and spend a lot of time focusing on things that are outside of their control. And it's like, well, you couldn't have done anything about that. What you can do is figure out, what do you have control over? What decisions can you make? Is there a solution to look at that might help with some of this process? And man, sometimes I love talking about that type of mindset and thought, even outside of work, just like people themselves getting caught in their mind of things that are outside their control. And I think that all plays into the decisions we make and the things that we can affect. So I definitely like the topic. And yeah, weather's a big one. And we've had that happen. Projects we're supposed to document, we're supposed to go out and scan, and it starts snowing, and it's like, look, sometimes things come up that you just can't do anything about, and technology has its limitations too, and weather might be one of those.
Marco, on your side of things, where do you see that side going with delays and weather, or whether it be other delays?
Yeah. I was wondering whether you were going to have a dig at me for our weather roadmap. Working on it, Cody. Working on it. Yeah. So it's a long way from where it was. Where what we used to be dealing with on the weather topic was contracts would generally refer to a weather station at the nearest airport, and obviously now we can get real-time information from what's coming on site. We can get much more accurate forecasting that feeds into not only what people are doing on site, but also the contract terms and so on. That's just becoming really common, really important part of things. Something that we really like to talk about in terms of the significance of reality capture. So in this conversation, we're talking a lot about reality capture as an emerging technology, and something that can impact real-time decision making, can enable collaboration between the different teams, and so on. I expect in a couple of years' time, as more and more data is gathered, we'll be having a conversation about how the reality capture information actually impacts the planning software and planning tools, and that the future generation of planning tools will be very much impacted by what we're learning today from reality capture. Today, Evercam, every month, we capture a couple of 100 years worth of video of construction sites, of real-time action, reaction on construction sites. That data is what's going to drive planning. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen Adobe Photoshop come out with their new generative AI product suite. So a company that was all about the high-skilled engineer, you could use that word, who's using those design tools like Photoshop. Now they're informed by generative AI, and a relative amateur can suddenly create content informed by past actions, shall we say. That topic, that the future of planning is based on these large amounts of data that we're collecting today, where the computers can tell us what's likely to happen. It's seen this situation before a couple of hundred times. And the companies that we would work with who are building similar projects again and again and again. So if we take UPS delivery centers, somewhat similar distribution centers, somewhat similar projects again and again and again at global scale. As we collectively, together with the customer, get better at seeing patterns influenced by weather's an easy example. A concrete pour is a very sensitive, expensive part of the building process. Those two things interact with one another. We can just have more successful outcomes. Better planning informed by patterns and real-time data.
Yeah, and I just talking about that, Matt, and get you to answer that as well, is the existing conditions, the pre-construction, the operations, the design, I think is all starting to tie together. And I think what's tying that together is reality capture.
Yeah, no. And just to build on Marco's point, I think in anything, in any area, in any of these technologies, the more data we capture, the more we learn how to process and analyze that data. It all feeds into that same point of just we can learn from analyzing a single project of when we use scanning, when we use drones, when we have this capture, if we document it properly, and if we track the successes and the failures out of that data and what we were able to do with it, and we do that project by project by project, in so many areas, we're going to be able to predict what might happen on future projects. And this actually pushes into the conversation that I believe we talk about in the industry around digital twins. We are now seeing, when we talk about scanning, we talk about creating models of projects, we talk about tracking information. It's this future vision that I'm seeing many big players start these pilot programs on building digital twin programs for their entire industry. It is no longer just a one project focus. They see this vision of, what if I had a full digital twin of every facility? I document every facility. I'm now able to have IoT sensors and cameras and tracking, and I can take patterns that I see of where are people walking, where are my hazards. I can use it to do simulations of real, thoughts and trial things before they happen. And so there's this idea now of, how do we not just do one data at a time and one project at a time, but how do we bring this together as one single ecosystem that can be used for all of the benefits of, we have actual accurate map data to use because we're going to do a renovation, but we also have, data that we can use for simulations or analysis. So I think that the more people are starting to realize that there's way more power in this data than has been extracted to this point. When we talk about most reality capture historically, right? Everybody's gone out to projects before and taken a camera with them to take some photos of stuff, but they all got lost in a folder. Now Marco's talking about, okay, now we have full-time cameras. You can get in and see, you can track. And it also leads me to talk about one of the other problems that a lot of firms have struggled with in adopting things like this too is, what's the ROI of it? What's the ROI of being able to go back and look at, pictures from a site the whole time? Well, it depends. It depends on what it ends up saving. It depends on if it saves something. And same with scanning. A lot of times people say, well, why would we scan up front? Well, you might have issues in design because you don't have accurate documents. You might do okay without it, but you have to look at the comparison of if you don't do it, what do you historically do? And you have to do this comparison like we talked about a pilot. You have to compare the results of something new versus how you used to do it. You have to do that a couple times before you can really prove out what an ROI is. But all that to say, I think there's a lot of power in having a lot of data, and it's going to help us make informed decisions in the future that are going to save us tremendously.
Switching, on that point that you brought up through that is 360 photos or photos in general. How is that different, from what you're doing on that front, and how does that interrelate to the industry as a whole? Like, how are they different, and what's the techniques on why you would use them?
So, sorry, is the question there is the difference of the 360 type images over
static images versus construction video.
My first experience of that is it's an indexing problem. Matt just said, I throw all these images in a folder. Am I ever going to find them again? Am I ever going to see them again? Right? And sometimes in technology, we've been on these journeys where a small incremental improvement makes 1,000 times difference. In my lifetime, it was the difference between having to dial up the modem versus having always on internet. Everything changed. It was basically the same experience, but everything was different when you had always on. And with this continuous capture or 360, the difference is, funnily enough, with more information, it becomes easier to find the thing you want. And think of Google Street View. Right? If I knew that there was 10 million photographs out there and I had to find the one of my street, that would be a problem. But ironically, in Google Street View, with I don't know how many billions of photographs, it's actually easier to go and find the photograph and the section and the piece that I actually interested in, because I have all the other information as a reference point. So I have it within context. And there is this critical tipping point that once you've got enough data, it's actually easier. And that's been, I think that's just a truth. I hope I articulated it reasonably well. But sometimes as you get more of something, it becomes more manageable. And I believe we're there now with this constant total immersion images and video. And there is 360 video as well. That's part of what's happening. Slightly just jumping back to part of the conversation that we were on, I think we all every CEO intuitively knows when a good employee is walking out the door, there goes knowledge, there goes a company asset that is of great value. And what we maybe don't quite so intuitively know is something happening on site that was not recorded and indexed is a very similar story. There goes knowledge, there goes future learning, future reference that we lost as a company. And every day today, the AEC companies are letting go through their hands this really valuable information. And we must see this data as equivalent value to the knowledge we know is stored in the brains of our people. They are equally important. So those two things, being able to find it properly. Ironically, my answer to that is capture more, right? And then the other thing of value it. This is your knowledge, and your knowledge is basically what we all are. That's an AEC company is really the sum of the knowledge in that company.
I'd love to make a comment on both of those two. I love that example of the Google Earth. Like, if you just knew you had 10 million photos and you got to sit there and click through them and find your house, it'd be terrible. The thing that came to mind for me is that we are also in this process of the technology is changing quickly. Like, it wasn't that long ago, we weren't really using 360 cameras. It wasn't that long ago, the people couldn't use LiDAR. It was too expensive. I love the idea too around communicating within the community, and this whole idea of discussing these problems, discussing these solutions, because there are people that are brilliant at making technology, but they don't maybe have the industry knowledge. And then there are people in the industry that have all these problems. And when we have these conversations, we get to share that knowledge. So maybe back in the day, the guy taking all the photos for Google, it was like, man, we have 10 million good photos. We have one of your house. But then it's not until the user says, well, I don't know how to find it. My biggest problem is I need to get it quickly. Oh, okay. Well, now we have to program in a search for that. When we have this community and conversation, it helps us get with industry to find their biggest pain points, to then work with the technology providers and the people creating these solutions, and they get to say, okay, we now have this goal of figuring out how do we get this data into the platform, or how do we make this searchable to make it cohesive and usable. But love that point. And the other about, the difference between using the photos or using the 360 photos or even the 360 video walks on a job site versus the idea of having full-time cameras is just what you said. When you go through and do photos, it is whatever was there right at that moment. If the benefit of having video is that you get to see when someone comes and goes, you might catch an accident that happened. You're not necessarily going to get that in a still image, even if it is 360, even if you're doing it on a daily basis. It's not 24/7. The benefit of getting to see that, it really is your insurance, right? You're doing it because something might happen, and you're going to want that data if it does.
Yeah, and I think the thing too on the 360 photos that we've seen at the company I work at is that we just randomly take pictures. There's no real thought sometimes about how to go around taking the pictures, try to follow the same path, that overlap of pictures to make sure that you're getting everything while you're walking, how fast you're walking, blur the picture, just some basic photography type things that we're trying to teach our employees how to do that you might not think about when you're using it. And then I think the other aspect of it is like the analytics that Marco has with constantly doing that. Pictures have analytics too, with pixels and stuff like that, but they're not being used to document completely. One of the things that we push is if you're going to use something like OpenSpace or Cubics or Docs or any of these, is that it's not just the picture of the documentation that you're getting that return on investment, but it's also the ability to take those pictures and write RFIs out of them and take that data to not only document progress, but also to document the challenges that you're facing and how you solve them. I just want to talk through that conversation with you guys.
Well, and I think one of the biggest notes that I try to push in conversation, because I try to have this 30,000 foot view of every technology and all the different applications across all the industries, it really always pushes me to say, all the tools are great. Like, my goal is not to say, why is a scanner better than a tape measure, or why is full-time video better than a 360 camera. They all have pros and cons, right? Like, the 360 photo, super fast to walk through the job site and get imagery in spaces that maybe a full-time video camera isn't going to see inside this little room. And then a scanner has a benefit above 360 photo because it has precise measurement that you can use for design. And so it really becomes, and that's why when we go back to the beginning of the conversation, I think one of the biggest issues is the education piece. It's if I want all of these benefits, what is the full suite of tools that's optimized or that's for my type of industry or my type of project? And what's the process to really efficiently make use of all of them? Do I scan every day for progress, or why not? Do I do 360 photo every day, or why not? What's the cadence? Where is the true workflow to get the optimized value out of? So I think that's something important for us to all think about is, all the tools are awesome. The technology is great. What is your problem that you're trying to solve? Or what could be implemented on your type of project to really help you save or be efficient or be safer? That's something I love throwing in.
Marco, what do you think of Matt's concept of, obviously there's a tool for every need in the industry and where cameras fit into that?
Absolutely right. So I struggle with the concept of digital twin. That really with the cameras we're looking at a visual twin. It's a visual record. 360 primarily inside. That industry came to life, I think, with subcontractors. It was largely about proof of work. The fixed position cameras, they were often more owner led as a product. That changed as more the GCs now, and with full video, that it's opened up a whole load of new doorways. Drone, I think its strongest play is generally at the beginning of the project, when there's a lot of earthworks, big kind of volumes of material being moved around. So different cameras for different stages, and ultimately the customer doesn't care what took the photograph. It's a Google Earth analogy. You don't know whether that's a satellite or an airplane or a blimp or a tourist on their holiday who took the photograph. You're just going in to see that location. So yes, the camera should become irrelevant, and I think increasingly it will. I mean, like what do you classify the robot dog as? You know, he's walking around with a couple of cameras and sensors on him. The drones are increasingly becoming autonomous, which would allow them to be flying all the time. They start to look an awful lot more like fixed position camera. Wearables, it's constant video recording, but it's from all sorts of different angles, going into very intricate, detailed spaces. All of these worlds are blurring, and what we're really doing is pixels per square foot over time, wherever the action is, and then making that easy to find. So I would say the boundaries are blurring. Ultimately, would be my answer to that.
Yeah. And I think another thing, without being deep knowledge, I don't have deep knowledge in your platform yet and your vision forward, but it sounds like the combination of multiple of those sensors into one platform. And that is also the next thing that just has to happen in our industry, because if they're all valuable independently, that's great, but I can't afford to log into 5 different platforms to try to go look at the video over there and try to go over here to the point cloud to measure and find the 360, and then all of them have different timelines. And so the next thing that has to start happening in our industry is, again, the data is what's useful. The how we're using this data is where the power is. And so now we see certain platforms starting to take in multiple types of data. That's going to make it way more user-friendly, way more efficient, way easier to adopt, because it lowers the barrier to some of the things we talked about before, where people are scared to change. The technology can be difficult. It can be tedious. So the easier we make it to actually access and use and pull information out of, which part of that is, we need platforms that take in multiple types of data. I think that's another big step forward in the industry.
Yeah, and that combined reality capture platform, I think, Marco, what you're trying to develop with Evercam and others as well, is trying to bring all that data together. We don't want to go down that same pathway that design and others went down, where we developed all these different tools that we're going to be talking about, and they're all siloed. Because really, at the end of the day, in our industry and all industries that use reality capture, it's the combined effort of all those technologies, their advantages, and then where there are disadvantages, you have other technology that fills that need, and that advantage is there, and trying to connect them all together to make the best choices in the planning stages of this industry. I truly believe that's where reality capture falls, and it falls in all aspects, whether it's in beginning, the middle, or the end. I think it kind of is the glue that glues it.
Absolutely. So we all agree that nobody cares what took the photograph. And currently, you could say that the reality capture industry is largely differentiated by the underlying technology. Right? To a large degree, that's true. And actually, where we really need to be differentiating ourselves is what problems are being solved and for who. And the key to both of those things is, I think, interoperability, not siloing formats. So we would promote very much having an open API whereby any specialist workflow scenario can be built on top of anything that has been fed into Evercam. And again, there's an awful lot more ground to cover here before the dream becomes reality. But it will be about specialist workflows built on a common reality capture.
Yeah, I think that the actual conversation about reality capture is new, right? That term of reality capture is relatively new. I mean, I don't think I've heard of it until about 4 or 5 years ago. So I think a lot of that has to deal with the fact that they were all their individual products that were being developed, their different concepts. And now this real big push to try to pull them all together under the topic of reality. What do you think about that, Marco? And sorry, Matt, where do you see that going?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think historically, the word was not being used, and honestly, I'm not actually sure. Even though I have a company called Reality Capture Network, I don't even know if you look up the definition of reality capture. Is it there? I don't know. I tell people what I am shifting it to be within my focus and my community is, I feel like when it first came out and you heard people say reality capture, at first they meant laser scanning. They meant LiDAR. That I think is where the term started. But I as we've gone and as we look at, well, no, there's more capture devices, there's more data, I'm now pushing it to say reality capture to me is anything to do with capturing existing data on site and creating usable data that can be used for value. So whether it's a camera, whether it's a scanner, whether it's anything that is capturing information and coming back and using it to visualize or document or utilize, I'm kind of saying it's the whole field of that process. And obviously technology is a big part of it, and there's so many technologies, but the term is not a technology, it's the process of capturing and using data, I believe.
Marco, what do you think on that front as well? The term reality capture, do we have it right? The right definition? Is it started to be defined, like Matt said, or is it still wide open in terms of what we believe that term is?
Yeah. So reality capture, and then the insights we can get from it, the problems we can solve from it. For me, the bane of my struggle with the industry was at the dinner table, constantly having to go back to the security camera conversation. And I know they're not security cameras, but I didn't have a better way of explaining it, basically. So I felt like I always left the dinner table being asked to fix the person's security cameras. And now with reality capture, just simply in the title, we know we're dealing with something that's a lot more interesting, a lot more profound. And I think it is sticky. So yes, it's here to stay. And more so than that, I believe that the previous generation of construction technology was driven by planning tools. You could say AutoCAD started it, Autodesk with their product CAD, AutoCAD. And I believe that the next 30 years of what's going to be interesting in construction technology is going to be driven by the data we capture from sites today using reality capture technologies as they evolve and the knock-on effects of having all of that data.
And I guess, again, actually, as you're talking about it, I'm just thinking, I'm like, reality capture, anything to do with capturing reality, right? Visual is one of the most accurate pieces of that. If you can at real time open and see what is really there right now, that's as real reality as it gets. And I don't think a lot of people talk about the video piece in a lot of the reality capture conversations. But I also believe that when I think about that futuristic digital twin idea, where I really see this industry going, the ultimate dream is all of it. You have the platform of a full built-out digital captured model from LiDAR and BIM and whatever else. You have the IoT sensors, but you also have live video feeds connected to different areas. Like, it really is all of it. It's all the technologies, and partially because what we said a minute ago, they all have different benefits. They all have different use cases. And so when we look at the combination of them in order to get all of the benefit, I think that's one of those future visions. And of course, there will be different levels of that, different industries that maybe need certain portions more than others, but it's all important.
And that's the power of it, I think. It's the static versus the video, and how do they all relate? And I think that's what happened with drones, right? We had 360 pictures that were all taken from the ground, but it took a long time for us to take pictures of a site. 100 acres, some of the jobs that we work on are very large, and trying to take pictures of that or using one camera or two cameras that are video is hard to capture the whole picture of what the job and how it's changing. The challenge with drones also, though, is that there's a lot of legality. Because you're sharing the air with planes, which traditionally did a lot of that. That's why planes started to take aerial photographs and start to map the earth in that way. We were able to capture a lot of data about where people lived versus trying to map that on the ground. My focus of this next part of the conversation was to look at some of the legality and then where drones are going that are not in the air. Obviously, we see them in the air and all the autonomous nature of it. But now you're starting to see them going into pipes. You're starting to see them go into areas that are non-traversable. Just want to have a conversation, Marco, about where you're taking Evercam with that part of Evercam's technology. And we'll start with Matt, where you think this is.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think when we start talking about the legality side of our whole conversation, there's so many different pieces to talk about, from, the liability of being somebody who's capturing data and providing that to people to make informed decisions off of. And one thing I'll throw out even on that point is where I do think that when we're talking about the difference between visual and pulling analytics and data out of that, such as 360 photos, such as the live video and the benefits of those, I do think the conversation shifts quite a bit when we start talking about the LiDAR piece and the accuracy requirements for certain types of projects. And I do believe that that's a very important conversation, because there are a lot of companies, like I said earlier, that maybe quickly adopt a quick, easy scanner and they go out and try to use it on big industrial projects. Okay, there's a big difference between a $150,000 scanner, a $100,000 scanner, a $50,000 scanner, a $10,000 or and that's again where I think education is important, because now when you bring up the conversation of liability, what happens if you don't quite know what you're doing yet and you get a cheap scanner, you go document a building, and you hand that over to an engineering company and they design off of it and they build off of it and they have problems. Yeah, now we have a conversation of liability. What happened?
We're having that conversation in North Carolina, right? We have a lot of regulations. We're the first in flight, so we take that pridefully. We have many more regulations in our state in regards to the drone. We have to get NCDOT permitting on top of the Part 107. But the other aspect that's starting to be played out is that legality. We have people that, and you might take this to heart, that are not land surveyors, but they are curating as land surveyors. They're using the drone to survey and do certain survey techniques. They don't have any experience or any legality in terms of certification to say that data is accurate. We just had a quick conversation. There was a court case that occurred, and there was a gentleman that lost. It just happened in North Carolina, in and they've been fighting this the last 3 years. And one of the things that he was trying to prove was that what we were creating was orthomosaic, and he was trying to do that to just take pictures of the areas that he was doing. But in reality, he was using it to lay out property lines and contours and things like that. And the surveying board in North Carolina said that that is part of surveying. Just want to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say it's the backbone behind why I say that education is so important, and there's so many technologies, and we have to talk about the use and what you're using it for. And because even though it sounds fun and it's great visual technology, when you look at certain use cases in certain industries, it becomes very critical. You take on a lot of liability if you're touching what is actually under a licensed surveyor's type of work. You can get in, like you just gave the example, lost the court case. You do have to be careful about what you're actually doing with that data. The moment that you're getting into actual survey practice and property lines and that type of stuff, you have to be working with a surveyor. Now, we are a survey company, so I do understand that deeply. I believe it. However, I'm also a huge advocate of all the technologies and it growing and adopting, and I want more people to use scanning. I fully believe you do not have to be a surveyor to laser scan. I think that there are plenty of people that should be scanning. One of the biggest problems that I see in the industry is the lack of knowledge as to when do I need survey or when do I need control, or even within the scanning itself, so many people, and to be honest, even people selling the scanners, don't fully understand even accumulated error. And so if you take a scanner and you go scan a 20,000 foot warehouse, how much error is built up in your data? And how do you verify that? That I could talk about the survey needs for that for days, and even for the construction side, you look at scan data for floor flatness, right? Well, that's a huge use case that's growing. How do you know your data's flat? You have to have good control processes when we start talking about the high accuracy needs of actual measurement data. So that's something that I do lean towards saying. It's not super easy. It's not super cheap. Sometimes you get what you pay for, whether you're hiring someone or you buy a piece of equipment. That part, everyone needs to dig in and do really good due diligence before we start applying the technologies in critical areas.
Yeah, and any of those concepts, right, you believe deep down that if you're doing volumetrics or contours or anything that would be considered as land survey, that's absolutely done by a qualified land survey.
So, here's what I would say in that aspect. So, I believe there are certain uses for the scan data, such as the floor flatness, that I do not believe that only land surveyors should be the ones doing the scan. I think it is okay for a construction company to have their own scanner and scan their floors. But what I do think they need is have the surveyor that is on that project come shoot in some targets for you, and let's train you on how to use the targets, how to process properly so you know your data is accurate. Because again, the problem is if you don't have control, there is likely going to be some type of tilt in your data, or there's some type of accumulated error along a length or up levels of floors. So I still think that it's okay for different people to do the scanning. However, they need to know when they need the control and have a surveyor come out for a day and set targets for you and work with them. But I think it is still okay for companies to get into scanning and do more of that without being a licensed surveyor. I don't push that hard to say you have to have it.
Marco, I think that's one of the things that you're trying to develop within Evercam is that corridor option to add drones. And I think what's so unique, Matt, about what they're doing that I don't see a lot of other technology do is that they're incorporating the icons of where the cameras are located on the site. So they are essentially taking the data from 360 cameras for the ground. They're taking drone data to capture the site, and then they're incorporating through their icon where the cameras that are fixed video cameras are on that. And you can click on that icon when you're looking at the drone data or the 360 to get that live feed. And it's all tied together into one platform. I think, Marco, that would be a great conversation to have on that topic.
Yeah. I mean, but I guess ultimately my position on this, when we start to talk about, you know, where is it going, is to assume that everything is going to be captured. Everything is going to be seen. And that's the new status quo. Or one should always assume that. You asked about the sort of the legislation part of that.
Right.
And with recording, with cameras very much, but with all of these technologies, we're now absolutely in a world where legislation and what's actually happening are out of sync with one another. To a large degree, existing legislation is playing catch up on things like the sort of professionalism there, certifications, qualifications that Matt's talking about a little bit. What is a surveyor? You know, that there's a question mark after that now, because of the democratization of the tools. Privacy is a really big subject when it comes to legislation. In that world over here in Europe, we have this GDPR is the new rule book, which I believe that there's similar legislation making its way forward in America, which actually is very forward thinking legislation. But again, it's out of sync. And if anything, you could accuse GDPR of being a little bit ahead of its time. It's one of those times when the legislation is trying to lead. The principles of it being, if you are recording data of any sort, you must have a good reason for doing that, and you must tell people. Those two simple rules are often very hard to implement. And a third and a very interesting leg of it is that if there is data captured about you, you own that data and you're entitled to it. So those three relatively kind of innocuous sounding rules, when you think of the volume of information being captured by such a wide variety of people in a wide variety of situations, it's just impossible to obey those three rules. But it has given the technology companies something to strive for. And I believe it to be, you know, a very good constitution for privacy rights for the future, a framework for privacy rights for the future. Safety is a part of the story as well. When we were flying 3-kilogram drones in the air, it was a very different story to when we're flying something that fits in your hand and wouldn't hurt if it fell on your head. So, you know, that landscape is shifting. Yes, so I would say the legislative part, privacy, safety, and professionalism are the three drivers. And it is just true that legislation and what's actually happening are out of sync with one another, and that's going to be a dance. It's a shifting landscape, and there's going to be court cases along the way. And a bit of catch up on both sides.
And that's one of the things that, you know, as a company that I work for, that's one of the things, Matt, that I've actually sought outside counsel for all reality capture, because I want to have this basic understanding. I don't want to walk into something that some of the people that we see in the United States are walking into, and they don't know that they're walking into it per se. Some might be heinous in that, but a lot of it is just your typical person that goes buys a drone and takes some data and sells it to somebody, and nobody tells them that they're in the wrong. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, having that person to lean on and have that conversation, whether it's on the education of what we're trying to do or on the legality side of somebody, you know, informing you how to stay out of trouble, I think is what Marco was pointing to. The legislation is catching up to where we're at. They're behind. They have been behind ever since all this really started to explode. But trying to stay in the right of it is kind of where we're at.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's the best people can do. I totally agree that, you know, even the conversation I had a minute ago, just talking about the importance and the liability and the accuracy piece, people aren't messing up because they want to. They're messing up because they didn't know better. They didn't know that they were doing the wrong workflow, or they didn't know they were using the wrong tool, or they didn't know that they shouldn't have been doing XYZ, whatever it is. That's why I say the education piece is important, no matter what it is. If it's talking about what's legally okay right now, if it's talking about what issues you might run into, if we educate, if we have these conversations, it makes people stop and think before they do something. Wait a minute, am I looking at the right tool? I was about to buy this scanner or this camera or this drone, but then I heard this conversation where this happened. Like, maybe there's another one that I should look at, or maybe there's a workflow I need to ask someone about. Or that's why I love these conversations, because it sparks ideas. You're getting different perspectives. You're hearing stories from people that have gone through different things. And then when you share that out with people, it really helps raise that awareness to potential wins, potential issues, potential successes. And I think the education piece is going to help solve a lot of that. But I think people are naturally wanting to do good. So even when we see those issues, and I tell them that too, when I go to somebody who brings me a project they messed up on, which is also why I talk about this, it happens a lot. I get people on a monthly, weekly, bi-weekly basis that are like, we bought this scanner, or we captured this data, but we can't figure out why this issue's happening. I always say, like, there is no hard feeling in saying that you messed up because you didn't know you needed this control or you needed this survey. So people that do mess up, you don't have to feel bad about saying, hey, I didn't know either. You just didn't know. Nobody told you. You're starting out the process. And again, we go back to talking about that's the journey of innovation. That's the journey of technology. It's going to happen. I think the community and education piece can just help some people fast forward and not hit their head on the same wall that many of us have, over the last several years.
And that difference between photogrammetry and scanning, I think, is a major point too. You have the photogrammetry piece, which is more on the 360 photos and video, and then you have the scanning and that. Want to talk about accuracy a little bit of scanning and why we would want to use scanning techniques, whether it's a sonar, which you just saw with like the Titanic and what they're doing to survey the bottom of the ocean, LiDAR techniques, or just basic laser scanning, which you use in buildings to capture reality. Because one of the things that we're trying to do is capture reality, the existing condition at a certain time. That's essentially what we're trying to do. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we didn't have really good as-builts in the past. Explain the differences between where we would use photogrammetry versus where we would use scan.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of detail we could get into there, but in general, there's so many tools, right? So there's photogrammetry from drones, there's aerial LiDAR from drones, there's photogrammetry on the ground using cameras, using phones, and then even when we get into laser scanners, there is a whole range of laser scanners, from a Matterport that has LiDAR to an entry-level Leica BLK to a RTC 360 to a Faro and a Trimble and a Topcon and a Regal and there's so many devices. They all have pros and cons, and in general, the cheaper, the less accurate. Just on if we're to go high level and say, how do I know what I need? You first have to start with the use case, right? So a lot of times an architect might reach out to someone that's doing scanning and say, hey, I need you to come document the interior of this building. We're going to do a renovation. We don't have an as-built. And they often will respond and say, yeah, the accuracy we're looking for, like, we're okay with 6 inches, because if we go out there with a tape measure and we're doing all these markups, we're probably going to get that or worse. And to someone that does scanning, 6 inches is like crazy. That's not accurate at all in our mind. So when we look at a lower accuracy request, then it opens up and says, okay, we can use the cheaper scanner, we can use the faster scanner, we can use the mobile scanner where we can walk and capture as we go, because it's fast, it's that accurate. But then we have to ask the other questions again of, what if that construction company also wants the data? and they want to do a floor flatness analysis of the same room that the architect's wanting the floor plan of. Well, the architect may want 6 inches, but how accurate does the floor flatness data need to be for fixing concrete or fixing floors? Most of the time, people ask for that to be 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. That's a very different device and a very different workflow that has to be used for that level of accuracy. So no matter what device you're looking at using, the first thing that we always try to start with is, what is the data going to be used for? And then we have to work our way backwards and say, okay, here's the devices that you have at your disposal as an option, and here's the workflows you have to follow to get there. The biggest problem, again, that I continue to see is that people don't understand that mix-up. They don't understand that you can't just buy the cheapest scanner and also use it for all of the high-end applications. You have to have the right devices and workflows for that level of accuracy. But in general, the cheaper devices are usually fast and not quite as accurate, and the higher devices might take you longer and it's going to be more expensive. And I guess even the lack of education on that is also where I see some pressure in the industry, that when a construction company or somebody wants the tools used and they don't understand the differences, they default, of course, to saying, hey, I want you to bring the fast one out. Like, I just want the data quickly because it's fast. And so we even see people hurt themselves in the request for the data because they don't understand what they're asking for. So I hope that gives a little bit of a picture. But
yeah, absolutely. And Marco, the thing that I've always stressed too is the as-built main piece of it. We're obviously trying to capture reality through the planning process of the job, through the actual construction of the project, but then we have to hand that over. You talked about digital twins, visual twins. What is the long-term goal of what you guys are trying to do to help as-built? Because the United States, and Matt and me can attest to this, just paper plans are just not going to cut it going forward in the future. We've got to have a digital mindset going forward of how we capture all this data throughout the construction process and use it to better retrofit our buildings, build new ones.
Yeah, what you're talking about there is the value of the data during the life cycle of the building once built. Yeah. So that, as you say, the retrofitting and so on. I think the thing that's changed there is now we can store lots and lots of data very, very cheaply. So the standard with our system is that everything that's captured is kept for 3 years to start with after the end of the building. So you want to get into that through that period of time where the first sort of snags or questions or issues might be likely to come up. In reality, with pretty much exponential reduction of costs, that asset should be the property of the building owner. I mentioned in the GDPR, we talk about, if I have data about you, you own that data legally. And I think the same principle can apply to a physical object. If we have the data about a building, that it makes sense that value is captured and recognized. To back to my German story, I have keen memories of going into the Amt, the German official office, when I was making a planning application for my apartment. And there they have all of the records of the physical buildings of the city, each individual building, since the construction of, in that case, I was talking about 1800 and something. And it's there for service delivery, it's there for the functioning of the city, it's there for fire safety regulations, it's there for emergency services. It was just really brilliant how forward-thinking they had been about that asset in 1800 and whatever, that somebody thought, we better put this in a filing cabinet. You never know. I was glad to have been able to find it. And I think the same principle is now true, that we can and we should.
I just think, Matt, that's a huge next step of reality capture is that as-built piece. I just think we have struggled so much in the past of documentation of where to bring cities forward. And we're not just looking at BIM and and all these reality technologies of just one project, but we're looking at the ecosystem of the cities. And with that Asbuilting, it's trying to take all those different things on all these separate projects that different designers and GCs are building and trying to bring them into one big, gigantic of the areas around them. And I think that a lot of that has got better, but I think that's a huge thing into the future, which leads us into what you're trying to do with the Reality Capture Network. I was talking to Marco before the call with our last episode, Ralph Montague and Vinny, about the network they're creating with BIM coordinators for their summit that they put on. I want to jump into what you're trying to do with the Reality Capture Network, the podcasting that you're doing on your side of things that focuses on all of reality capture. And then the actual conference, which I think, and I was telling Marco, is one of the leading conferences in the United States and maybe even in the world. As young as the conference that you are, I think it's a huge topic that a lot of conferences do not spend a lot of time because they're much more focused on the 100,000 view versus a 10,000 of one of the things that's rocking our industry in a great way. Just want to talk about those three things: Reality Capture Network, the conference, and then podcasting that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I appreciate the chance to talk about it or the interest in it. And I could talk for days about the things that I want to do and the problems I see and how I want to solve them, but I'll try to keep it, in summary in different areas and of course, answer any questions or thoughts. But the overall idea, 3 years ago, I started the podcast for the first time because I realized this, that I've been saying this whole time, is I talk with so many amazing people. I've worked on every project I can think of, from nuclear to high-rise to forensics to ships to everything. And again, it's what excites me so much about reality capture in whole, is that I see the need and the benefit all over the world in every industry for different reasons. And I said, okay, well, I think that doing a podcast could be a way to have these conversations and talk about the uses, talk about the benefits, talk about the issues, and share it out with a huge network. I already had been building a LinkedIn network for a long time. I have 30,000 followers there. I have relationships around the world. And I said, how do I not just focus on me and doing my services company? How do I use this network I built, the relationships I've built, and help the industry more than just me going out and doing scanning work? And it was starting with the conversations as the starter piece. And the vision continued to build to say, I want to build a network that is more than just you listen to me talk on a podcast. I want to build a community around it to start helping with educating each other, helping people get over the problems they're having. I've had so many people reach out because they know I've been doing it for a long time, saying, we bought the scanner, we're stuck on this job, we don't know what to do next. And I help them figure out the process of, well, you need to integrate control here. We'll help you register the data. Or, there's companies that do the scanning that don't know how to take it and create a BIM model from it. So we're helping in that end. The idea now is we want to build the biggest network that helps people solve those problems. We help them understand the tools available. We help them understand how to implement them properly. So it started with the podcast. It then started to this vision of education. So we built an online education center on our website, and we've barely started. We've barely scratched the surface of the vision for that, but our plan is to create courses that train people how to use drones properly, trains people how to use scanners properly, trains people, and then apart from direct training, we want to fill it with case studies and white papers and have a go-to library of data that I wish I had 10 years ago, that I wish I had 5 years ago, that would help me learn about the different tools and the applications and the benefits. So there's the awareness building, but then there's the education piece. And then we decided to do our own conference as the next level of that, of, look, if we're building a community online and we are creating educational content, I also fully, truly believe in the power of getting together and being in person over just doing a video chat, because it's how I've built relationships over the years, going to conferences and meeting people in person and building those relationships so that when I have a problem, when I have a question, when I need collaboration, I have these relationships to collaborate with and to build upon. And so we said 2 years ago, let's just try putting on our own event and see if anybody wants to come, because we're going out to these other conferences and we don't see a big focus on this. And one of the reasons, I think a lot of the big companies, they know that this data is valuable. They know that this technology is coming and it's a part of the future, but it's not what's making them a ton of money today, right? If someone is selling $500 million of some type of software, do they really care about talking a ton about reality capture today? Maybe not. As it becomes more popular, it's going to be integrated more, but there's not a huge focus today. So I said, let's have an entire conference focused around all these technologies, talking about the uses, sharing case studies, talking about challenges, having panel conversations with people that are on the software, on the hardware, on the user, to have more of a community. I tell people when I talk about our conference, it is more like the mix of a TEDx event and a user group than it is most conferences you go to. We don't break out to 50 classrooms and there's 20 people in there talking. We are all in one big theater space with one stage. Every conversation, every panel, every presentation, we are all a part of. We're all getting to hear the benefits. We're all getting to hear the struggles. We're all getting to do Q&A with the panel together and hear the response. And so it's very much a relationship building time as well as a learning about the technologies. And the thing that excites me is seeing the level of interest, the level of companies that are coming and talking about this. And some of that vision I shared earlier in our conversation about the digital twins and the enterprises adopting this. That's who's coming and talking. ExxonMobil is coming to talk about their vision and need for digital twins of every facility and their assets, and they're trying to build guidelines and understand how to capture and what tools. And then we've got General Motors coming and talking about their whole program for hundreds of millions of square feet of capture and struggles and processes and what they need. And we've got Amazon Web Services coming and talking. We've got Jacobs Engineering, AECom. Large companies talking about big problems, vision of the future, technology they need. So it's one of the most exciting things for me. I look forward to it every year. And I feel like the reason that I'm so excited about reality capture and the things that I'm trying to do is that I see it solving problems for everybody that interacts. We have vendors come that are presenting their technology that even though we're a small conference, it is a niche conference. It is the people coming that need and want these solutions, that believe in these. So I have vendors that tell me, I sold more at your little event than I did going to this huge one in Vegas. It's like you don't get drowned out. This is people coming that truly believe in this. They're passionate about it. They want to make a difference. So that's why I say it's like a big user group as opposed to some big event. It is like everybody there's there for the same reason.
Yeah, and that's what I'm so excited about. I was telling my coworker, I told Marco in the past about your conference community that you built. Just watching you over the last few years with the podcast, the knowledge base that you're building, watching the conference virtually, and now bringing my coworker to RCN this year in Boise, which I think is a very unique difference of the big cities with the big conferences versus the small town of or city of Boise, Idaho. So we're really looking forward to it. I think you're spot on. I think that the what we struggle in the industry is we go to a lot of these conferences and we're just in the sales pitch the entire time. We're there from beginning to end. And with the one that I was in this past week, I was telling Marco this, you saw it in my email, that I was at ENR, very similar to what you're doing, but more on the engineering aspect, and yours focusing on reality capture. And that's what we've decided to do. We want to focus more on the concepts when we go to these conferences more than, being sold. Because, at the end of the day, we could be sold over the different technologies. And you still have that aspect within your conference, right? You still have the vendors that you can go see and learn about that technology. But the sole focus of it in the large arena is to bring all those different aspects together in one space. And Marco, that's why I was telling you about this conference, because I do, although I have not gone formally in person, I think it's a really big opportunity to go see and what Matt's doing. And on that note, Matt, what we're trying to do, and myself working with Marco and Evercam, the BIM Coordinator Summit in Dublin, Ireland, is another great example of a conference that's trying to take all these different concepts and what Ralph Montague is doing there. And they're trying to bring a conference together of people like me that do this for construction and other career choices, where it is a massive influx of people coming into the industry that want to join this technology revolution. And, Mark, I just wanted to get your opinion on where you're trying to take, Evercam in terms of that knowledge base that Matt's talking about, teaching people about the product that you're doing, and then your ongoing, what you think of where knowledge and how we share that.
Yeah. So grateful to Matt and the Reality Capture Network for what they're doing. It's such a joy when one is working away in one's own space to be able to lift your head up and see that not only are you not alone, but there are people there who are mapping out the landscape and helping us, I suppose, go further together. So really, really genuinely grateful for that. And I think the more we see an overlap between RCN and BIM Coordinators Summit of the type of people like yourself, Cody, that are benefiting from both of those, the better. Particularly, I think for people like myself who have not come from a construction background, engineering, yes, but construction, no. And I think the industry will benefit from that, making it more accessible to particularly technology people who are coming in sideways, can we say. And our role there, I hope, is to listen and to serve, to learn and to serve. It's Matt's audience that Evercam seeks to appeal to, and to find our place in the landscape and do it as best we can and bring others along with us. I'll be satisfied if we're achieving those goals.
Just to finish up with both of you, where do you think the industry is going in terms of reality capture? What is the next big push? What's the next big defining goal?
Yeah. So from our side, I think the immediate end game of this multiple sensors, multiple devices, all the data flow is what we see with NVIDIA Omniverse, with Meta and the Metaverse, right? So we're just trying to fully recreate to high fidelity what actually happened. Okay? But the why of that is so that we can build better, so that we can do better construction, build better infrastructure. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. That'll be my answer.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I agree. That's a great reason. It really, truly is, and for me, a lot of people ask me what I think is next and what's the future and, what's the next technology. And the thing that I just keep coming back to is I don't even care what the next technology is. I want the ones that are here now. We have so many amazing technologies. To me, it still is just putting together good ecosystems, making it easy to adopt, making it cohesive, having the workflows there, having the education there, so that it, like we talked about in the very beginning, with the amount of companies I talk to, I still think we're barely started. I think we have barely adopted these. We're on 2 out of 10 jobs, or we're in 4 out of 10 companies are using a piece of it, a scanner for one use case. I think we have 100 times more to do with the tools that already exist, just how we're using it, how we're capturing the data, what we're using with the information. So that's why, to me, I'm so excited about the collaboration and the community and talking together to put the solutions together to solve the problems. with the tools we already have. I think that that's what's most exciting to me. But I also agree that, and I feel like I could do a whole another hour and a half or whatever on the topic of the future of what does the metaverse mean to us and what is digital twin life. And like, I fully believe that in the future, and I don't have a timeline, but I believe that there will be a full digital twin of every asset on Earth. And there will be complete benefits that we see from that of wayfinding and augmented reality glasses that let us see visual overlays no matter where we are. And I have a lot of thoughts about the future for the digitization and how it will help us and ways that we'll see it integrated even with robotics. But I feel that even though I'm excited about that and I fully believe it's going to happen, I think we have to work on this foundation first, because I think geospatial and accurate and this data is a huge piece of actually making some of that future vision possible. But the one other piece that I want to maybe end with on my part is saying that a lot of us have ideas. A lot of us have visions about the future. A lot of us can see all these technologies and we think of ways to use them. But the one other thing that I like to say for people that consider that or think about it is it's not going to happen if somebody doesn't do it, right? The future doesn't create itself. Somebody doesn't invent the car without, the car doesn't invent itself, right? Somebody invented it. Someone went through the innovation and the failures and the pushing ahead. I'll leave one more quote. I often bring this up in innovation is Thomas Edison, right? How many iterations of trying to create a light bulb did it take for him to be successful? 1,000 or 10,000, whatever the number is, it's a lot. It's a lot of iterations. It's a lot of failure to get there. And then I pose people with the question at what iteration would you have quit? If you want to create something amazing, something different, something unique, you want to do something extraordinary, you also have to work on your mindset, your approach, your consistency, pushing through those failures and creating an environment, even as a company, that encourages innovation, that encourages ideas, and yes, still create controlled environments because you don't want to fail on a project, but you really should put a focus on innovation in whole within your company and you as an individual, you as a professional.
Yeah, I really hope that in the future, as I talked to Marco before, is that we bridge the gap between the owners, the architects, the engineers, the contractors, and the subs, and then ultimately the end user. Because I think that whether it's reality capture or how that information is used to drive other innovation and ultimately build the world that we live in, I think that's the ultimate goal that all of us in this industry is trying to do. I want to thank both of you. This has been an amazing conversation. It is really great to get two thoughtful leaders in the industry in this particular field to talk through these things. I just wanted to thank you, Matt, for joining us, and Marco on this weekend's podcast. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking with both of you. Excited to continue the conversation. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks you all.